intelligence, we also need to solve consciousness along the way. Do you think AGI systems need to have consciousness in order to be truly intelligent?
Yeah, we thought about this a lot, actually. And I think that my guess is that consciousness and intelligence are double dissociable. So you can have one without the other, both ways. And I think you can see that with consciousness in that I think some animals and pets, if you have a pet dog or something like that, you can see some of the higher animals and dolphins, things like that, have self-awareness and are very sociable, seem to dream. Those kinds of, a lot of the traits one would regard as being kind of conscious and self-aware. But yet they're not that smart, right? So they're not that intelligent by say IQ standards or something like that.
Yeah, it's also possible that our understanding of intelligence is flawed, like putting an IQ to it.
Sure.
Maybe the thing that a dog can do is actually gone very far along the path of intelligence, and we humans are just able to play chess and maybe write poems.
Right. But if we go back to the idea of AGI and general intelligence,
Yes.
Dogs are very specialized, right? Most animals are pretty specialized. They can be amazing at what they do, but they're like kind of elite sports people or something, right? So they do one thing extremely well because their entire brain is optimized.
They have somehow convinced the entirety of the human population to feed them and service them. So in some way, they're controlling.
Yes, exactly. Well, we co-evolved to some crazy degree, right? Yes. Including the way the dogs, even wag their tails and twitch their noses, right? We find inexorably cute.
Yeah.
But I think you can also see intelligence on the other side. So systems like artificial systems that are amazingly smart at certain things, like maybe playing Go and chess and other things, but they don't feel at all in any shape or form conscious in the way that you do to me or I do to you. And I think actually building AI is these intelligent constructs is one of the best ways to explore the mystery of consciousness, to break it down, because we're going to have devices that are pretty smart at certain things or capable at certain things, but potentially won't have any semblance of self-awareness or other things. And in fact, I would advocate, if there's a choice, building systems in the first place, AI systems that are not conscious to begin with, are just tools until we understand them better and the capabilities better.
So on that topic, just not as the CEO of DeepMind, just as a human being, let me ask you about this one particular anecdotal evidence of the Google engineer who made a comment or believed that there's some aspect of a language model, the Lambda language model, that exhibited sentience. So you said you believe there might be a responsibility to build systems that are not sentient. And this experience of a particular engineer, I think, I'd love to get your general opinion on this kind of thing, but I think it will happen more and more and more, which not when engineers, but when people out there that don't have an engineering background start interacting with increasingly intelligent systems, we anthropomorphize them. They start to have deep, impactful interactions with us in a way that we miss them when they're gone. And we sure as heck feel like they're living entities, self-aware entities, and maybe even we project sentience onto them. So what's your thought about this particular system? Have you ever met a language model that's sentient?
No.
On record?
No.
And what do you make of the case of when you kind of feel that there's some elements of sentience to this system?
Yeah, so this is, an interesting question and obviously a very fundamental one. So first thing to say is I think that none of the systems we have today, I would say, even have one iota of semblance of consciousness or sentience. That's my personal feeling interacting with them every day. So I think this way premature to be discussing what that engineer talked about. I think at the moment it's more of a projection of the way our own minds work, which is to see sort of purpose and direction in almost anything that our brains are trained to interpret agency, basically, in things, even in inanimate things sometimes. And of course, with a language system, because language is so fundamental to intelligence, it's going to be easy for us to anthropomorphize that. Back in the day, even the first the dumbest sort of template chatbots ever, Eliza and the ilk of the original chatbots back in the 60s, fooled some people under certain circumstances, right? It pretended to be a psychologist, so it would just basically rabbit back to you the same question you asked it back to you. And some people believe that. So I don't think we can. This is why I think the Turing test is a little bit flawed as a formal test, because it depends on the sophistication of the judge, whether or not they are qualified to make that distinction. So I think we should talk to the top philosophers about this, people like Daniel Dennett and David Chalmers and others who've obviously thought deeply about consciousness. Of course, consciousness itself hasn't been there's no agreed definition. If I was to speculate about that, I kind of the working definition I like is it's the way information feels when it gets processed. I think maybe Max Tegmark came up with that. I like that idea. I don't know if it helps us get towards any more operational thing, but it's I think it's a nice way of viewing it. I think we can obviously see from neuroscience certain prerequisites that are required, like self-awareness. I think is necessary but not sufficient component. This idea of a self and other and set of coherent preferences that are coherent over time. These things are maybe memory. These things are probably needed for a sentient or conscious being. But the difficult thing I think for us when we get, and I think this is a really interesting philosophical debate, is when we get closer to AGI and much more powerful systems than we have today, how are we going to make this judgment? And one way, which is the Turing test, is sort of a behavioral judgment. Is the system exhibiting all the behaviors that a human sentient or a sentient being would exhibit? Is it answering the right questions? Is it saying the right things? Is it indistinguishable from a human? And so on. But I think there's a second thing that makes us as humans regard each other as sentient, right? Why do we think this? And I debated this with Daniel Dennett. And I think there's a second reason that's often overlooked, which is that we're running on the same substrate, right? So if we're exhibiting the same behavior, more or less, as humans, and we're running on the same, carbon-based biological substrate, the squishy, few pounds of flesh in our skulls, then the most parsimonious, I think, explanation is that you're feeling the same thing as I'm feeling, right? But we will never have that second part, the substrate equivalence, with a machine, right? So we will have to only judge based on the behavior. And I think the substrate equivalence is a critical part of why we make assumptions that we're conscious. And in fact, even with animals, high-level animals, why we think they might be, because they're exhibiting some of the behaviors we would expect from a sentient animal. And we know they're made of the same things, biological neurons.
So we're going to have to come up with explanations or models of the gap between substrate differences between machines and humans to get anywhere beyond the behavioral. But to me, sort of the practical question is very interesting and very important. When you have millions, perhaps billions of people believing that you have a sentient AI, believing what that Google engineer believed, which I just see as an obvious, very near-term future thing, certainly on the path to AGI, how does that change the world? What's the responsibility of the AI system to help those millions of people? And also, what's the ethical thing? Because you can make a lot of people happy by creating a meaningful, deep experience with a system that's faking it before it makes it.
Yeah.
And are we the right? Who is to say what's the right thing to do? Should AI always be tools? Like, sure. Why are we constraining AIs to always be tools as opposed to friends?
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, these are fantastic questions and also critical ones. And we've been thinking about this since the start of DeepMind and before that, because we planned for success. And how however remote that looked like back in 2010. And we've always had sort of these ethical considerations as fundamental at DeepMind. And my current thinking on the language models is and large models is they're not ready. We don't understand them well enough yet. And in terms of analysis tools and guardrails for what they can and can't do and so on, to deploy them at scale. Because I think there are big still ethical questions like, should an AI system always announce that it is an AI system to begin with? Probably yes. what do you do about answering those philosophical questions about the feelings people may have about AI systems, perhaps incorrectly attributed? So I think there's a whole bunch of research that needs to be done first to responsibly, before you can responsibly deploy these systems at scale. That will at least be my current position. Over time, I'm very confident we'll have those tools to, like interpretability questions and analysis questions. And then with the ethical quandary, I think there it's important to look beyond just science. That's why I think philosophy, social sciences, even theology, other things like that come into it, where arts and humanities, what does it mean to be human and the spirit of being human, and to enhance that and the human condition, right? And allow us to experience things we could never experience before, and improve the overall human condition and humanity overall, get radical abundance, solve many scientific problems, solve disease. So this is the era, I think, this is the amazing era I think we're heading into if we do it right. But we've got to be careful. We've already seen with things like social media how dual-use technologies can be misused by bad actors or naive actors or crazy actors, right? So there's that set of just the common or garden use, misuse of existing dual-use technology, and then of course there's an additional thing that has to be overcome with AI, that eventually it may have its own agency, so it could be good or bad in of itself. So I think these questions have to be approached very carefully, using the scientific method, I would say, in terms of hypothesis generation, careful control testing, not live A/B testing out in the world. Because with powerful technologies like AI, if something goes wrong, it may cause a lot of harm before you can fix it. It's not like an imaging app or game app where if something goes wrong, it's relatively easy to fix and the harm's relatively small. So I think it comes with the usual cliche of, like, with a lot of power comes a lot of responsibility, and I think that's the case here with things like AI, given the enormous opportunity in front of us. And I think we need a lot of voices and as many inputs into things like the design of the systems and the values they should have, and what goals should they be put to. I think as wide a group of voices as possible beyond just the technologists is needed to input into that and to have a say in that, especially when it comes to deployment of these systems, which is when the rubber really hits the road. It really affects the general person in the street rather than fundamental research. And that's why I say, I think as a first step, it would be better if we have the choice to build these systems as tools to give. And I'm not saying that they should never go beyond tools, because of course the potential is there for it to go way beyond just tools. But I think that would be a good first step in order for us to, allow us to carefully experiment, understand what these things can do.
So the leap between tool to sentient entity being is one we should take very carefully.
Yes.
Let me ask a dark personal question.
Sure.
So you're one of the most brilliant people in the AI community. You're also one of the most kind and, if I may say, sort of loved people in the community. That said, creation of a super intelligent AI system would be one of the most powerful things in the world, tools or otherwise. And again, as the old saying goes, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. You are likely to be one of the people, I would say probably the most likely person, to be in the control of such a system. Do you think about the corrupting nature of power when you talk about these kinds of systems? That as all dictators and people that have caused atrocities in the past always think they're doing good, but they don't do good because the power has polluted their mind about what is good and what is evil. Do you think about this stuff, or are we just focused on language model?
No, I think about them all the time. And I think, what are the defenses against that? I think one thing is to remain very grounded and sort of humble, no matter what you do or achieve. And I try to do that. My best friends are still my set of friends from my undergraduate Cambridge days. My family's, and friends are very important. I think trying to be a multidisciplinary person, it helps to keep you humble, because no matter how good you are at one topic, someone will be better than you at that. And always relearning a new topic again from scratch or a new field is very humbling, right? So for me, that's been biology over the last 5 years. Huge area topic, and it's been, and I just love doing that. But it helps to keep you grounded, and keeps you open minded. And then the other important thing is to have a really good, amazing set of people around you at your company or your organization who are also very ethical and grounded themselves and help to keep you that way. And then ultimately, just to answer your question, I hope we're going to be a big part of birthing AI, and that being the greatest benefit to humanity of any tool or technology ever, and getting us into a world of radical abundance and curing diseases and solving many of the big challenges we have in front of us, and then ultimately, help the ultimate flourishing of humanity to travel the stars and find those aliens if they are there, and if they're not there, find out why they're not there, what is going on here in the universe. This is all to come, and that's what I've always dreamed about. But I think AI is too big an idea. It's not going to be, there'll be a certain set of pioneers who get there first. I hope we're in the vanguard so we can influence how that goes. And I think it matters who builds, which cultures they come from and what values they have, the builders of AI systems. Because I think even though the AI system is going to learn for itself most of its knowledge, there'll be a residue in the system of the culture and the values of the creators of that system. And there's interesting questions to discuss about that geopolitically, different cultures, as we're in a more fragmented world than ever, unfortunately. I think in terms of global cooperation, we see that in things like climate, where we can't seem to get our act together globally to cooperate on these pressing matters. I hope that will change over time. Perhaps, if we get to an era of radical abundance, we don't have to be so competitive anymore. Maybe we can be more cooperative if resources aren't so scarce.
It's true that in terms of power corrupting and leading to destructive things, it seems that some of the atrocities of the past happen when there's a significant constraint on resources.
I think that's the first thing. I don't think that's enough. I think scarcity is one thing that's led to competition, sort of zero-sum game thinking. I would like us to all be in a positive-sum world, and I think for that, you have to remove scarcity. I don't think that's enough, unfortunately, to get world peace, because there's also other corrupting things like wanting power over people and this kind of stuff, which is not necessarily satisfied by just abundance. But I think it will help. But I think ultimately AI is not going to be run by any one person or one organization. I think it should belong to the world, belong to humanity. And I think there'll be many ways this will happen. And ultimately, everybody should have a say in that.
Do you have advice for young people in high school and college? Maybe if they're interested in AI or interested in having a big impact on the world, what they should do to have a career they can be proud of, or to have a life they can be proud of.
I love giving talks to the next generation. What I say to them is actually two things. I think the most important things to learn about and to find out about when you're young is what are your true passions. Is first of all, there's two things. So one is find your true passions, and I think you can do that the way to do that is to explore as many things as possible when you're young and you have the time and you can take those risks. I would also encourage people to look at finding the connections between things in a unique way. I think that's a really great way to find a passion. Second thing I would advise is know yourself. So spend a lot of time understanding how you work best. Like, what are the optimal times to work? What are the optimal ways that you study? How do you deal with pressure? Sort of test yourself in various scenarios and try and improve your weaknesses, but also find out what your unique skills and strengths are, and then hone those. So then that's what will be your super value in the world later on. And if you can then combine those two things and find passions that you're genuinely excited about that intersect with what your unique strong skills are, then you're onto something incredible, and I think you can make a huge difference in the world.
So let me ask about know yourself. This is fun. Quick questions about day in the life. The perfect day, the perfect productive day in the life of Demis Hassabis.
Yeah.
Maybe these days there's a lot involved.
Yes.
So maybe a slightly younger Demis Hassabis, when you could focus on a single project, maybe. How early do you wake up? Are you a night owl? Do you wake up early in the morning? What are some interesting habits? How many dozens of cups of coffees do you drink a day? What's the computer that you use? What's the setup? How many screens? What kind of keyboard? Are we talking Emacs Vim, or are we talking something more modern? So it's a bunch of those questions. So maybe day in the life.
Yes.
What's the perfect day involved?
Well, these days it's quite different from, say, 10, 20 years ago. Back 10, 20 years ago, it would have been, a whole day of research, individual research or programming, doing some experiment, neuroscience, computer science experiment, reading lots of research papers, and then perhaps at nighttime, reading science fiction books or playing some games.
But
right?
lots of focus, so like deep focused work on whether it's programming or reading research papers.
Yes. So that would be lots of deep, focus work. These days, for the last sort of, I guess, 5 to 10 years, I've actually got quite a structure that works very well for me now, which is that I'm a complete night owl, always have been. So I optimize for that. So, I'll basically do a normal day's work, get into work about 11 o'clock and sort of do work to about 7 in the office. And I will arrange back-to-back meetings for the entire time of that, and with as many people as possible. So that's my collaboration management part of the day. Then I go home, spend time with the family and friends, have dinner, relax a little bit, and then I start a second day of work. I call it my second day of work around 10 p.m., 11 p.m. And that's the time till about the small hours of the morning, 4 or 5 in the morning, where I will do my thinking and reading of research, writing research papers. Sadly, I don't have time to code anymore, but it's not efficient to do that these days, given the amount of time I have. But that's when I do, maybe do the long kind of stretches of thinking and planning, and then probably, using email or other things, I would fire off a lot of things to my team to deal with the next morning. Like, actually thinking about this overnight, we should go for this project or arrange this meeting the next day.
When you're thinking through a problem, are you talking about a sheet of paper with a pen? Is there some
it depends.
Structured process?
I still like pencil and paper best for working out things, but these days it's just so efficient to read research papers just on the screen. I still often print them out. Actually, I still prefer to mark out things, and I find it goes into the brain better and sticks in the brain better when you're still using physical pen and pencil and paper.
So you take notes with the.
I have lots of notes, electronic ones, and also whole stacks of notebooks that I use at home. Yeah.
On some of these most challenging next steps, for example, stuff none of us know about that you're working on, you're thinking. There's some deep thinking required there, right? Like what is the right problem? What is the right approach? Because you're going to have to invest a huge amount of time for the whole team. They're going to have to pursue this thing. What's the right way to do it? Is RL going to work here or not?
Yes.
What's the right thing to try? What's the right benchmark to use?
Yeah.
Do we need to construct a benchmark from scratch? All those kinds of things.
Yes. So I think of all those kind of things in the nighttime phase, but also much more, I've always found the quiet hours of the morning, when everyone's asleep, it's super quiet outside. I love that time. It's the golden hours, like between 1 and 3 in the morning. Yeah. Put some music on, some inspiring music on, and then think these deep thoughts. So that's when I would read, my philosophy books, and Spinoza is my, recent favorite, Kant, all these things. And I, read about a great scientists of history, how they did things, how they thought things. So that's when you do all that's when I do all my creative thinking. And it's good. I think people recommend, you do your sort of creative thinking in one block. And the way I organize the day, that way I don't get interrupted, because obviously no one else is up at those times. So I can go, as I can sort of get super deep and super into flow. The other nice thing about doing it nighttime wise is, if I'm really onto something, or I've got really deep into something, I can choose to extend it, and I'll go into 6 in the morning, whatever, and then I'll just pay for it the next day.
Yeah.
Because I'll be a bit tired and I won't be my best, but that's fine. I can decide, looking at my schedule the next day, and given where I'm at with this particular thought or creative idea, that I'm going to pay that cost the next day. So I think that's more flexible than morning people who do that. They get up at 4 in the morning. They can also do those golden hours then, but then their start of their scheduled day starts at breakfast, 8 a.m., whatever, they have their first meeting. And then it's hard. You have to reschedule a day if you're in flow.
Yeah, that could be a
I don't have to do that.
Special thread of thoughts that you're too passionate about it. This is where some of the greatest ideas could potentially come, is when you just lose yourself late into the night. And for the meetings, I mean, you're loading in really hard problems in a very short amount of time. So you have to do some kind of first principles thinking here. It's like, what's the problem? What's the state of things? What's the right next step?
Yes. You have to get really good at context switching, which is one of the hardest things, because especially as we do so many things, if you include all the scientific things we do, scientific fields we're working in, these are entire complex fields in themselves, and you have to sort of keep up abreast of that. But I enjoy it. I've always been a sort of generalist in a way, and that's actually what happened with my games career after chess. I one of the reasons I stopped playing chess was because I got into computers, but also I started realizing there were many other great games out there to play too. So I've always been that way inclined, multidisciplinary, and there's too many interesting things in the world to spend all your time just on one thing.
So you mentioned Spinoza. Got asked the big, ridiculously big question about life. What do you think is the meaning of this whole thing? Why are we humans here? You've already mentioned that perhaps the universe created us. Is that why you think we're here? to understand how the universe works?
I think my answer to that would be, and at least the life I'm living, is to gain and understand the knowledge, to gain knowledge and understand the universe. That's what I think. I can't see any higher purpose than that. If you think back to the classical Greeks, the virtue of gaining knowledge, I think it's one of the few true virtues, is to understand the world around us and the context and humanity better. And I think if you do that, you become more compassionate and more understanding yourself and more tolerant, and I think all these other things may flow from that. And to me, understanding the nature of reality, that is the biggest question. What is going on here is sometimes the colloquial way I say, what is really going on here? It's so mysterious. I feel like we're in some huge puzzle, but the world is also the universe seems to be structured in a way, why is it structured in a way that science is even possible? That, the scientific method works, things are repeatable. It feels like it's almost structured in a way to be conducive to gaining knowledge. So I feel like, and why should computers be even possible? Isn't that amazing that computational or electronic devices can be possible, and they're made of sand, our most common element that we have, silicon that on the Earth's crust. They could have been made of diamond or something. Then we would have only had one computer, right? So it's a lot of things are kind of slightly suspicious to me.
It sure as heck sounds this puzzle sure as heck sounds like something we talked about earlier. What it takes to design a game that's really fun to play for prolonged periods of time. And it does seem like this puzzle, like you mentioned, the more you learn about it, the more you realize how little you know. So it humbles you, but excites you by the possibility of learning more. It's one heck of a puzzle we got going on here. So like I mentioned, of all the people in the world, you're very likely to be the one who creates the AGI system that achieves human level intelligence and goes beyond it. So if you got a chance, and very well you could be the person that goes into the room with the system and have a conversation, maybe you only get to ask one question. If you do, what question would you ask her?
I would probably ask, what is the true nature of reality? I think that's the question. I don't know if I'd understand the answer, because maybe it would be 42 or something like that. But that's the question I would ask.
And then there'll be a deep sigh from the system. It's like, all right, how do I explain to this human?
Exactly.
All right, I don't have time to explain. Maybe I'll draw you a picture. That it is, I mean, how do you even begin to answer that question?
Well, I think it would.
What would you think the answer could possibly look like?
I think it could start looking like more fundamental explanations of physics would be the beginning. More careful specification of that, walking us through by the hand as to what one would do to maybe prove those things out. Maybe
giving you glimpses of what things you totally missed in the physics of today.
Exactly.
Just here's glimpses of there's a much more elaborate world, or a much simpler world, or something.
Yes. A much deeper, maybe simpler explanation of things, right, than the standard model of physics, which we know doesn't work, but we still keep adding to. So, And that's how I think the beginning of an explanation would look. And it would start encompassing many of the mysteries that we have wondered about for thousands of years, like, consciousness, dreaming, life, and gravity, all of these things.
Yeah, giving us glimpses of explanations for those things. Yeah. Well, Demis, you're one of the special human beings in this giant puzzle of ours, and it's a huge honor that you would take a pause from the bigger puzzle to solve this small puzzle of a conversation with me today. It's truly an honor.